200 years ago, you could have walked within 20 feet of a warm, occupied home in the dead of a plains winter and never known it was there. All you'd have seen was a low mound in the snow, dried grass bent flat across the top, maybe a thin thread of smoke rising from the middle. That was the whole show from outside. Inside, a family sat around one small fire in their shirt sleeves, while the wind drove the temperature down to 40 below. No furnace, no insulation you could buy anywhere. And notice something else. No wood pile the size of a barn either, because a fire big enough to fight 40 below on its own would burn through a forest in a season. The warmth in that shelter never came mainly from the fire at all. I'm Thomas Yazzie. I grew up, Dene, in the high desert of the Southwest. But a lot of what I know about cold weather building, I learned the way most of us learn the skills outside our own homeland, by traveling, listening, and spending real winters with people who'd been solving this exact problem since before anyone kept written records of it. I've stood inside a rebuilt earth lodge on the northern plains in January with the wind screaming outside, and I felt exactly what I'm about to describe. It's one thing to hear that a hole in the ground can keep a family warm at 40 below. It's a different thing entirely to sit inside one in shirt sleeves while the thermometer outside says otherwise and realize the whole argument was already settled a long time before you got there. Think about what happens to a modern house when a winter storm knocks the power out. Within a few hours, the temperature inside starts dropping, and by the second night, people are sleeping in their coats in a house that cost a fortune to build. Even with the power on, plenty of families pay $400 a month or more just to hold the cold back. That's a house fighting winter the whole time it's occupied. The Mandan and Hidatsa people along the upper Missouri River and plains and plateau nations across a wide stretch of this continent weren't fighting winter that way. They'd engineered their way around it, and the whole design starts from one fact about the ground itself that most modern builders never think about. The first decision happened before anyone moved a shovel of dirt, and it was choosing the site the way you choose a business partner. Builders look for a gentle south-facing slope because that orientation soaks up every hour of low winter sun available. They wanted well-drained soil, ideally sandy loam above the river's flood line, but close enough to water and timber to be practical. The reasoning underneath that choice matters as much as the choice itself. Wet ground pulls heat out of a body or a building far faster than cold air ever could, and a pit dug into poorly drained soil turns into a cold, damp bowl within a season. Dry ground holds warmth, wet ground steals it. So the site selection came first, and it was unhurried. Then came the dig, and it went down 3 to 4 feet into the earth, not 1 foot. And that depth is the whole secret, which I'll get to. A lodge floor out on the plains might stretch 30 or 40 feet across, big enough for an extended family, their gear, and in the worst weather, even a favorite horse brought in near the door. Every basket of dirt that came out of that hole got piled carefully to one side because none of it was wasted. That same dirt was going right back on top as the roof. Inside the pit, the floor got shaped smooth, a fire pit dug at the center, and sleeping benches cut into the earth walls around the edge, up off the coldest air near the ground. With the pit finished, the frame went up. Heavy center posts, often cottonwood, stood around the fire pit, tall as a man, and then some connected by beams across the top. A ring of shorter posts circled the outer edge, and long rafters leaned from that ring up to the center beams, leaving one opening at the peak for smoke. Over the rafters went a thick mat of woven branches. Over that a heavy layer of dried grass, and over the grass went the dirt from the pit, packed down about a foot thick. Each layer did its own job. The woven mat held the structure up. The grass insulated and kept the dirt from sifting down through the gaps. The earth on top was the mass, the heavy blanket that made the whole system work. That earth roof did something else for free that was never really the point, but mattered anyway. Grass seed in the soil sprouted, and within a season the whole lodge wore a living coat of prairie. From a distance it read as a low rise in the land. Under snow it disappeared almost completely, which is exactly the scene I opened with. That wasn't camouflage as a goal. It was just a natural result of building with what the land already offered. A buried room with an open fire in it has an obvious problem, and it's smoke. The entrance solved it, and it was never just a hole in the ground. It was a low, covered tunnel, several feet long, facing east or south away from the hard north wind, with a hide hung at the outer end, and a woven screen just inside the lodge itself to block any direct gust from hitting the fire. Cold, fresh air crept in low through that tunnel. The fire warmed it. Warm air rose and carried the smoke straight up and out through the opening at the peak. One opening low, one opening high, and the fire ran the whole system like a chimney that never needed adjusting by hand. Now here's what actually makes the machine run, the part I promised at the start. Walk out to any old root cellar in January and put your hand on a jar sitting on the shelf. It isn't frozen. Walk in there in August, and the cellar is cool. That isn't a trick of the cellar walls. That's the earth itself. At the surface, ground temperature swings with the weather down to what builders call the frost line. But below about 3 feet, the earth stops caring what the sky is doing. Down there, it holds steady, somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, all year, warmed slowly from below by the planet itself, winter and summer, forever. That number, 50 to 55 degrees, is worth sitting with for a second, because it's the entire engineering behind everything I've described so far. It means a hole in the ground, dug to the right depth, is functionally a free thermal battery that never needs charging and never runs flat. Modern geothermal heating and cooling systems, the expensive kind installed by contractors today with pipes and pumps and a 5-figure price tag, work off this exact same principle, pulling on that same steady band of underground temperature. The old builders arrived at the same physics with a shovel and an understanding passed down from people who'd watched it work for generations, long before anyone had a word for geothermal anything. So when a family dug their lodge floor 3 to 4 feet down, they weren't only hiding from the wind. They were moving the entire household inside the Earth's own steady temperature. On the coldest night of the year, that shelter started at around 50 degrees before anyone struck a single spark. The small fire and a dozen warm bodies only had to lift the air 15 or 20 degrees more to reach real comfort. And those thick earth walls and that heavy packed roof soaked up the day's heat like a cast iron pot, releasing it back slowly all night, so a bed of banked coals at midnight was plenty to see everyone through until morning. A tent fights the cold air all night long. A house built into the ground stops fighting it and partners with the earth instead. This same underlying principle shows up in other cold weather building across this continent, adapted to whatever the local ground and climate offered. Semi-subterranean pit houses in the Pacific Northwest and parts of the Great Basin use the identical logic, digging down to reach stable earth temperature before building any structure above it at all. Snow itself, packed and shaped correctly, traps still air in a way that can hold an interior well above outside temperature using nothing but the snow's own structure. Different materials, different regions, but the same underlying move every time. Stop fighting the moving air outside and find something stable to build into or against instead. None of this required a single purchased material. No insulation from any store, no fuel delivery truck, no propane tank needing a refill before the worst cold of the season hit. It required knowing the ground, knowing the sun's angle across a slope, and understanding that heat management is mostly about mass and stillness rather than about the size of your fire. A family that dug their lodge right could sit comfortable at 40 below with wood consumption that would barely register against what a modern camper burns trying to keep a tent livable at half that temperature. Think about that gap a lot between a house that spends $400 a month fighting the cold and a lodge that costs nothing but labor and understood exactly where to put itself in the landscape. The old builders weren't enduring winter through toughness alone, the way the story sometimes gets told. They'd solved it with a design that started underground before it ever went up, using a fact about the earth that most people walking past a root cellar today have never stopped to think about either. It's easy to assume that people without modern materials simply suffered through hard winters and made do. What actually happened in case after case across this continent was a level of applied physics that most of us would call sophisticated engineering if we saw it on a blueprint instead of buried under 2 centuries of assuming the past was simpler than it really was. Tell me down in the comments where your people are from, and if there's a cold weather building technique passed down in your own family that never made it into any book. I read every one of these, and more than a few have turned into the next thing I put together for this channel. Until next time, walk easy out there, and I'll see you at the next fire.